I can't quite explain what pleasure I have in introducing to these three people. You know, when we were going to do this conference, I knew always that they would be here. This is they meaning Moinak Biswas and Supriya Chaudhuri. And then I got to know of Pinaki and had to get them. And I thought these three would just provide incredible insights into these two films that you've seen over the last 2 days, Goopy Gyne Bagha Byne, 1969, last night, and Hirak Rajar Deshe, or The Kingdom of Diamonds, tonight, that's 1980. So just by way of very quick introduction, Supriya Chaudhuri in the middle, Professor Emerita, Jadavpur University in Calcutta, is a legendary teacher. And if she protests, there are many people here who can attest to that. Supriya Di, as we call her, may have retired from active teaching, but in terms of research and writing, she has not slowed down at all. She continues to work on early modern European literatures, Indian cultural history, cinema and modernism, and translates Bengali poetry and fiction into English. Just in the current year, she has published an edited volume, Religion and the City in India from Routledge, and several articles, including a chapter in the book, The Form of Ideology and the Ideology of Form, from Open Book Publishers. She has also had the opportunity to know Satyajit Ray as a close family friend from her childhood. Moinak Biswas here is professor and department head of film studies and coordinator of the Media Lab at Jadavpur University. So in 1997, when I went back to India to do my research on my dissertation, everybody said, have you talked to Moinak? Wherever I went, have you talked to Moinak? I mean, he's become a really good friend and someone who's helped me out tremendously on a daily basis in all kinds of work that I do. He has edited a collection of essays, Apu and After, revisiting Ray's cinema. They just came out in 2005, and I think that remains one of the best volumes on Ray. And currently he's working on a book about the work of Hrithik Ghatak, the other really famous Bengali director. In addition to being the preeminent scholar of Bengali cinema and a revered teacher himself, Moinak is also a media maker. He has written and co-directed the award-winning Bengali feature film, Sthaniyo Shangbad, Local News, 2010, and produced, actually it's called Spring in the Colony in English, sorry, and produced a commissioned video installation across the burning track for the 11th Shanghai Biennale in 2016. Pinaki De is a graphic designer. He teaches in a college, English. He's a professor of English in a college in outskirts of Calcutta. He has designed almost 500 book covers to date. He is the winner of many awards, including the Publishing Next Award for the Best Book Cover Designer in India twice, in 2017 and 2019. He designed the layout for the Pather Pachali sketchbook from HarperCollins that came out in 2016, and Travels with the Alien, HarperCollins 2018. You guys should check this out. It's a very interesting book for people in the West. A member of the Society for the Preservation of Satyajit Ray Archives, he is also the assigned designer of the Penguin Ray Library, the special editions that seek to preserve Ray's archival works. Most of you know this by now, but just to quickly bring all of us up to date, Satyajit Ray remains to this day the best-selling author of young adult and children's fiction in Bengali. And Bengali is the 6th most spoken language in the world, so that's a lot of readers reading his books. And he has an afterlife online, in comic books, all kinds of stuff after his death. He also was a very important graphic designer. All the sets that you saw were designed by him. All the costumes that you saw were designed by him. Everything in this film. So when we were thinking about what films to show, and this conference has been organized around the thematic of wonder, because we thought that wonder would be a good way to cut across the various medias in which he had worked, film, graphic art, and literature. And we thought, what could go well with this kind of thematic? And we then decided to show the Goopy Gyne films, the 2 of them that he directed. There's a 3rd one that was directed by his son, based on his own script, and he also composed the music for that as well. What year was that?
I think it's around 90s.
Okay. And then the third one that's coming on November 7th is a detective film featuring his very, very, very popular sleuth figure, Feluda, or Pradoshmitar. And this is the one in which I think, anyway, I hope you get to come and see that. It's a wonderful film and it's also restored digitally. And then November 9, we are showing something that's no longer a young adult or children's fiction. By the way, the detective film is based on his own story. That's important to say. Okay, let's get to this. The last film is not for children, but it's about celebrity culture. So these are not films that are usually shown in either North America or in England. And so I thought, this would be a good opportunity to introduce audiences here to these films because we just love them. And I mean, Goopy Gyne Bagha Byne, Moinak was reminding me yesterday, when it first released in 1969, it had a continuous run of like over 100 weeks.
100 weeks.
So that's, pretty amazing for a film that, it remains one of his most popular films. So let's start with some questions I have for you. Just by way of, starting it out, Moinak, if you would want to tell us a little bit about the source of the story of the first film and, the family legacy.
Well, the story, Goopy Gyne Bagha Byne, was serialized in this family children's magazine, Shandesh, in 1915. The story was written by his grandfather, Upendra Kishore Ray Chaudhuri. Ray had been toying with the idea of making the film for a while, but he finally kind of got to the production in 1960, late 67, early 68, I think. He was looking for a slightly bigger budget than his usual kind of outlay for his films, because he worked on a very, very small budget. And Goopy Gyne Bagha Byne, he was looking for a producer who would be, who would agree to put in more money. So finally, that big budget production was, those who know the Indian currency was 4 lakh rupees, which is not even $1 million in Indian sort of currency. So this was, the interesting thing is that when he was really seriously thinking of making the film, he actually prepared a long treatment note. And as was his practice, he kind of illustrated it. He kind of drew on the margins and drew the figures, some of the motifs. This is now published in one of the Penguin Ray Library books, which came out last year, I think, called The Treatment of Note of Goopy Gyne Bagha Byne.
Yes.
So this was the 2 versions, 64 and 65. The interesting thing is that I think I should tell you is that the film story differs, differs quite substantially from the original story by his grandfather. In fact, I would say that the flavor of the story also changes substantially. It's much more kind of, there's much more fun, there's much more kind of, possibility scope of exploring various media, as it were, graphically, musically, and so on. And the characters of Goopy and Bagha change a lot from the original story to the film, even from his treatment note 64, 65 to his film. And what else should I say?
Father.
Right. Father, of course, you didn't ask about. His father was and remains one of the most important writers of children's, it's not only meant for only children. The children, it is usually said to be children's literature, but also for almost people of all age. He is a constant reference in all kinds of things we write in our everyday, daily conversations. Shukumar Rai, his father, and his nonsense verse is, if you ask me, is one of the, probably among the very finest in the world. And also a kind of, not really trained, Ray was trained as a kind of painter, draftsman, but Sukumar Rai wasn't trained really, but also experimented with photography, printing, and so on. And there is an interestingly the Goopy-Bagha note, treatment note, original, that Ray wrote. Actually, the Halla king and the Shundi king, when they finally meet, interestingly, they call each other Udo and Budo, which is not there in the film. Udo and Budo is from a fabulous kind of story by Sukumar Ray, his father, translated as Abracadabra by Satyajit Ray himself. And it's kind of twiddle-dee-twiddle-dum figure. So Ray actually wanted to bring a shadow of that into the film, but he finally decided against it.
It struck me today, not so much Goopy Gyne, but this film, all the dialogue it rhymes
Rhyming dialogue.
throughout. I
Rhyming.
mean, I thought you probably must have got it, right? The translation didn't, but the rhyming is just mind-blowing.
Only the teacher doesn't speak in rhyming dialogue.
Why do you think that is?
So I was asking myself, why, because I had the impression originally, just an impression from long ago, that the entire text of Hirak Rajar Deshe does in fact rhyme. And then I noticed that the teacher does not speak in rhymed verse. And I started asking myself why this is so. And it struck me that one of the most notable influences on Hirak Rajar Deshe, which after all was not written by his grandfather, but was an original screenplay composed by Ray himself, to me the proximate influence on this composition were the verse dramas of Rabindranath Tagore. Ray was a student at Tagore's university. There was an unmistakable influence of Tagore in a great deal of the work he did. In the film that you see, there is this overlay of constant rhyming, humor, mischief, and you don't really see that layer, but it's very much present in the personality of the school teacher. I'm thinking particularly of two early plays by Rabindranath Tagore, one called Prayashchitta, which means expiation, published or written in 1909. And this was reworked to make another play called Poritran, 1929. And both these plays feature a character called Dhananjay Boiragi, who is a baul singer. And he encourages the people to protest against an oppressive, tyrannical king and not to pay their taxes. That's in fact the subject matter of both these plays, which take the seeds of their plot from an earlier novel that Tagore wrote in 1889 or something, called Bou Thakuranir Hat. So both these plays then are about governance, good governance, protest, resistance to tyranny, and how the people can resist. And this figure, Dhananjay Boiragi, who appears in both these plays, Expiation and Deliverance, the second play, Poritran, translates as deliverance. This character then comes back in another play, which I think is dated 1923, Muktodhara, the waterfall, where this is a much more complex symbolic play about the building of a dam by an engineer scientist, rather like the scientist engineers in both these, the magician figure in both these films, and the resistance to that tyranny, which is again led by this baul singer figure called Dhananjay Boiragi. Now, the point that we came, to this from was the fact that Tagore's verse dramas, they are called verse dramas, but they are mainly written in free verse. That's to say the text does not rhyme, but there is a great deal of singing. there are many songs interspersed. So in the main, these dramas don't use rhyming verse as such.
Right.
In the main, there may be some exceptions, but in the main they don't. And Udayan Pundit seems to come very much from that tradition. And I think that he really seems to be stepping out of that Tagorean verse drama, where the seriousness, the metaphysical, the urgency, the need to resist rebellion, it's a very important theme in all these plays by Tagore, especially Muktadhara, which has, the theme of ecological resistance as well by the people against a dam, which creates enmity between them about the sharing of waters. A final point, which I could make it here, but let me just make it in one go. Yes. A final point is this is a point made by Prathama Banerjee in a book called Elementary Aspects of the Political, which was published 2 years ago, 2020. And she suggests that from the early 20th century, there is very strong tradition in Indian theatre, films featuring kings and kingly tyranny. And she mentions Girish Ghosh's Siraj-ud-Dawla and D.L. Rai's Shah Jahan, and Tagore's Rakta Karubi, which is a film called, which is a play, the title translating to Red Oleanders, and one could also mention Raja, King of the Dark Chamber. So all these films all these plays belonging to us, building up a strong dramatic tradition of the king and tyrannical government, which is resisted by a section of the populace. And Prathama Banerjee suggests that the need to stage the implosion of the political subject because of a kind of overreaching, overarching oppression, that is something that seems to be going through Indian theatre right up to the 1960s and 70s. And she suggests that where historians and political scientists are looking towards history for a non-monarchical democratic tradition, the theatre prefers to stage the people as resisting kingly power. So kings, oppressive monarchs, are constantly appearing on the stage in order to stage people's resistance. And that too seems to be something that is a theme in both these films.
Yeah, great. One more thing, is this going to be too simplistic to say that the people are speaking in a language that rhymes, that's more folksy, oddly, whereas the other, Udayan, that's more erudite, more cultured, more learned?
Well, that would be like Shakespeare, of course. I mean, the reverse. Because in Shakespeare, the elite speak in blank verse and the people speak in prose. And here you have the people speaking in rhymed verse and this learned teacher figure speaking in prose. So I don't exactly know what that means.
Yeah, I was also thinking, of that one particular song in Goopy Gyne Bagha Byne, the first part, where they go to the Shundi Raja's court, and the song they sing, Maharaja Tomare Salam, that, and so much of it is about we come from Bengal, we are Bengalis, and talking about the language itself as having this quality of flowing freely and pranero bhasha, like vital, right? Like it's like very lively, and Shaurera bhasha, Anonder bhasha, it's joyous, it's about freedom. Now, maybe, I know, usually we think about rhyme as imposing some kind of constraint, but it seems like, Bengali is so onomatopoeic and all of that, like I'm thinking that the play with the rhythmic patterns, like that may be more inherent to the language here, whereas the other is more like grammatically different.
If I may say something.
Yeah.
Actually, in that context, when Goopy Bagha sing that song in the court, Shundi. The primary contrast was between the classical ornate singing on one hand,
Right.
and this song they themselves describe as simple, simple song composed
Right.
with simple emotions in a simple tune. That is the contrast, So you bring it back to the local and the more kind of familiar terrain. And the classical singing was seen to be coming from some kind of a ritual sort of perspective or background.
Okay, so no. Okay. Let's talk about the quality of the graphics.
Yeah.
One could say it's very childlike, much of it, and it's children's. I mean, we know he's a consummate artist, like incredible modernist aesthetics, all the posters and all the book covers, and yet he does this here. Is this like amateurish in the sense of like from love, amateur?
Consciously amateurish, right?
That's
So, there is a context to it. Ray, whenever he used to sort of write in his script, the first thing was to, conceive it in his draft book, which is called the Kheror Khata. And those books contain all his sketches, all the short divisions, everything. Now, that was understandable, but he went further. He actually used to do everything right down to the color coordination of the dresses. For example, Goopy Gyne Bagha Byne, you have the flags, remember? The flags and the different shapes that are there. Even that is actually, done to the right, last detail. I would actually point out, if you remember the scene where the messenger comes up with a calligraphic kind of sign language that Halla is declaring war on Shundi, even that can be deciphered, and Ray actually, put that with a lot of care, so that even that which comes up in maybe for 2 seconds in the screen, that can be deciphered, and people have deciphered what that private language should be. So if you look at the set design and the scenarios, you can find that Ray is also trying to differentiate it through design. For example, the chamber of the evil magician, or say the chamber of the king, the Halla and the Shundi, they are very different from each other. I was discussing this with Moinak, and the evil magician, if you understand, he sketched it, almost like Ivan the Terrible. He was particularly fond of the film, and he sketches it like that. And even the chamber of the evil magician probably echoes
Ivan the Terrible.
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah. So design plays a very important kind of, you can say, a feature by which he actually distinguishes certain scenarios. Even look at the natural scenes. He took a lot of care in sort of curating, in taking recays, right? So, even the trees that you see in the background and all that has this calligraphic feature that somehow blends with the narrative. And I personally feel, Bhaskar, that you said that, it's consciously. One of the good things about Ray is the title cards design. If you see the title cards, he never did it in the second film, Hirak Rajar Deshe. But in the first film, the title cards are all designed by him. And if you see that he is consciously actually trying to imitate a kind of a style which is childish, and he will actually take this to a kind of a greater length in another film which we'll see, Shonar Kella, the Golden Fortress.
Don't say anything about the storyline.
No, not. But if you see...
It's amazing.
It's an amazing film. But if you see there, the title cards would be almost drawn by a child. And it's imitated.
That's a conceit. It's drawn by the child.
Drawn by a child. So I think it is consciously there. There is a wonderful advertisement for Goopy Gyne Bagha Byne called Ajob Chobi, Goopy Gyne Bagha Byne. It's a strange film, Goopy Gyne Bagha Byne. And here you only have, absolute random sketches describing that. So he was also trying to sort of pitch it as a kind of a film which has not been, made before in Bengal, which is something that has this child in it, that every child in you can see. It's not only meant for the children, but for even the adult. A child within, an adult can actually enjoy the film. I think design plays a role.
Yeah. Since we have gone to design, may as well talk about the ghost dance sequence, a 7-minute long sequence. in the middle of this film that sort of stands out and yet blends in. It's completely part of the narrative and yet it pops like differently
So-
because it's avant-garde, experimental, whatever you call it.
I can tell you one thing. So the draft book of Goopy Gyne is almost like 180 pages, right? More than that, 190. But he actually has a separate draft book for the 7-minute sequence, and that runs into 125 pages.
Separate, yeah.
It's a separate one for the 7-minute sequence, and there, although it is not seen, even the shape of the shoes and the way they will be placed are designed. Of course, all the characters with their class differences and hierarchies, they are sort of explicated.
So tell us a bit more about the characters, what they are.
Okay, so I think Supriya will be better
No,
placed.
no,
Okay,
no, go
so the if you look at contemporary Bengal, if you look at the ghost dance, it's sort of the ghosts are actually they belong to different classes. So you have the Sahib ghosts, which is basically the
White man.
the white man, and they are of course they somehow are the stereotypical kind of sahibs that can be seen.
Drinking alcohol, getting drunk, that's important.
Yes, that's a very important point. And you also have the upper classes, say for example the Brahmins, right, with their, again, very stereotypical kind of depiction. And then you also have other kind of, the diggoj, it's the intellectuals, right, who would also probably belong to the upper classes. And there are dancers. Who may not be, they are the ones who make more free movements. So they are the ones who blend across the screen, okay? They are the ones who are like white ghostly, make ghostly appearances. They are much more free. And they are wearing masks as well, and very interesting. So what is very important is that the movement of the upper classes and the Sahib ghosts are extremely staccato-like. It is like they are moving in a kind of a calculated strategic way. And there is a page in the draft where he's actually mapping out the movement. So, you know where they will move, and how they will move. He's so detailed about that. So it's a conscious decision to make them move in that way and then blend it with probably the more commoners who are more free. Many say that there are influence of Uday Shankar's, Kalpana.
So say a bit more about that.
Yeah. So
Uday Shankar's, it's a 1948 film. The great Indian dancer, Uday Shankar. That's the only film he made. And he used his troupe he actually created an experimental dance center in the hills, in the Himalayas, Almora, which was dissolved quite quickly actually. Then very interestingly, some of those dancers trained in his Almora school in the hills actually came and joined the incipient Indian People's Theatre movement, which was one of the most important kind of left-wing cultural kind of consolidation that was happening around 1942-43, right? And its impact kind of continued for several decades. So what happened was that some of these, well, it's a long story, I have to put it briefly. Some of these people, immediately after independence, 47, they moved into the film industry. And the kind of new Indian popular form that you see in the early 50s had actually a great deal of, the contribution of the IPTA, the Indian People's Theatre, left-wing theatre movement, performing arts movement people, their contribution played a very important role in the formation of the new popular cinema, Indian cinema in the early 50s. Uday Shankar's work actually, he used many of these people around a time when the IPTA was also trying to make its own films based on Maxim Gorky's play Lower Depths, based on some other kind of, other stories. And they were actually trying to pool money together and make independent films. They've succeeded in making about 2 or 3 of them. So Uday Shankar's Kalpana intersects very interestingly with this project. And Ray considered it a brilliant film only in parts. And he thought some of the kind of fantasy sequences were far ahead of its time, the 1940s. I'm saying all this because it is easy to watch this film now. A restored version is available on YouTube.
And if I think till midnight, Criterion is on 50% sale. And one of the Martin Scorsese World Cinema collections has Kalpana. So it was restored by Scorsese Foundation.
I'd like to make a point about the dance, not about the movement, which I'm really interested to learn about this film made by Uday Shankar called Kalpana. But it struck me that the representation of the Sahib's ghosts may owe something to Ray's friend David McCutcheon, who did a lot of the subtitling and worked with Ray very closely on many of the films. David McCutcheon's life's work was to document the terracotta temples of Bengal. And these terracotta temples have very vivid, lifelike models of contemporary society, including sahibs and all the classes of society, Brahmins and workers, and so on. And it may be that McCutcheon, who was traveling around Bengal and taking photographs of these temples with their amazing terracotta friezes, I think that's what they're called, friezes, may have shown some of these to Ray, and Ray therefore thought of putting them all together in a dance. This is something that struck me.
Another thing that I think, Ray was extremely fond of sequential arts as well, and a lot of things may have sort of percolated.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, of course, he was very fond of comics. I mean, let us put it simply. But, the sequentiality, the way, he builds up this sequentiality, the treatment, I think he's one of the first one who thinks about it, in India in a kind of a more intellectual, conscious manner. And if you look at the layers of, the last blend of the dance, which features all the tires together.
Well, that's what reminded me of
the terracotta
temple. Because if you read, David McCutcheon's life's work, his Terracotta Temples of Bengal, that's the book. And you see these photographs that he took. Some of these temples no longer preserve, all that work. Very, very elaborate work with these friezes of characters of the everyday of the,
But
the
also
time,
late 19th century Kalighat pot painting, especially the satirical, that they're making fun of the priestly class and all those. Because
That's
I see
true.
the Brahmin with the tika, and that's what I'm thinking. I also thought of like the Czech animation, claymation, all of that in the mid-60s.
He was very fond of Norman MacLaren, that we know. Okay. I mean, he was very fond of Winsor Mackay. For example, he wrote articles on Winsor Mackay.
Who's he?
I mean, Ray.
Who are these people?
So
because
Winsor
not
Mackay,
everyone will know.
Winsor Mackay, of course, is one of the doyens of comics in the world. I mean, he's from here, and if you look at his work, I mean, he's such a great influence. And Ray was like a fanatic in collecting comics. So even today, most of the collections are there in his home, and he used to collect this. He used to look at this, and he was also very fond of these early animations, which is actually documented in some of his writings as well. So they may have played a role. I think it's a kind of a combination of a lot of factors that used to carry. I mean, as Supriya said, that I think the terracotta one is a wonderful kind of an insight. So a lot of thing was happening in his head, and it's very difficult to pinpoint and that's the magic of Ray. You cannot pinpoint what he's really trying to do, but yet there is this temptation to sort of go through.
I think
another important thing.
I want to move to the next.
Just one thing before because this is important here. Because one thing you have to understand, Ray in 1967 was actually negotiating with Columbia Pictures here in order to make a film, a sci-fi film called Alien. And there are alternative titles of Alien that he wrote. One is called Mongol Kabba, which will be like Epics from Mars, and also Avatar. I mean, that was also written. And, he was to make this film. He made trips to LA and to the studio bosses, and he penned Peter Sellers and Marlon Brando, later James Coburn and Steve McQueen to play characters there. But that fell through because of a dubious kind of a intermediary whose name is Michael Wheeler.
Wilson.
Michael Wilson. And after that, what happened was he concentrated on Goopy Gyne Bagha Byne. So there is also this very important facet. You know, he made a recce of for Alien, but he stopped it and then he went for
Right. Okay, so we got to talk about Borfi, the wizard figure, because that's, I think, spectacular. And unfortunately, most of you know this by now, that yesterday a whole reel, in the old days we used to call it a reel, quite a bit of the film was missing from the copy that was sent by the National Film Archives. I don't know what happened. We'll try to figure it out. But 2 songs were missing, including one song that for me is the soul of the film. So there's that. Class, I'll show you that in class. So, but if you want to, any of you, let's talk about technology, the relationship to technology, to witchcraft, to Burfi, and in this film, this other character.
the scientist.
Right, I'd like to, yes. Well, I mentioned Tagore's play Muktadhara, The Waterfall, and that features an engineer called Vibhuti, who has been hired by the evil king, the tyrannical king, who's called, I think, Ronoji. And he is in charge of building this dam and stopping up this waterfall. And the role, the worship of the machine by these oppressive forces and the resistance to the machine by the people who are on the side of the waterfall and nature. This is a very important theme in Muktadhara. Sorry? No. Yeah. So I think that, that kind of opposition is very much in Ray's mind. The role of magic, perhaps Moinak will say a little more about that, because a parallel character in the earlier film is a magician rather than a scientist, whereas in the second film it's very much a scientist. It seems to me that the second film is much more political. It was made, I think this point needs to be made because it hasn't been made so far. It was made 5 years after Indira Gandhi's emergency, 1975, which led to, the imposition of a kind of state of emergency on the Indian polity, and a lot of people went to jail, and a lot of, a great deal of oppression was very visible and manifest. And Ray did not like the emergency. He made the film maybe some years later, but certainly the film does have a much stronger political message. From the beginning, the purpose of the purpose clearly set out: let us overthrow this oppressive king. And it's interesting that in Muktadhara, there is a school teacher with his students, but the students have already been brainwashed, and they are in fact like Nazi youth. They are singing songs in praise of the tyrant, and the school teacher is encouraging them to do so. In Muktadhara, in those earlier plays that I mentioned, Poritran and Prayashchitta, the dynamic figure of resistance and release is Dhananjay Boiragi, the Baul singer. And these roles are, of course, slightly differently apportioned in Ray's making of Hirak Rajar Deshe. But it seems to me that politics plays a very important role, especially in the second film.
Burfi, yeah.
Oh, we have actually mentioned that. The evil magician, the black magician in Goopy Gyne Bagha Byne, and you can easily sort of recognize that. He's actually modeled on Ivan the Terrible, Sergei Eisenstein's final film, 2-part film. Ray was very fond of that film. He was a great admirer of Eisenstein's, but he has written on Eisenstein, and he mentions specially his film club career begins with screening Battleship Potemkin, which has happened across the world, I think. Many film societies in the 1920s in Paris, London, later in other parts of the world began with screening Battleship Potemkin. Ray was no exception. Ray's little Film Society in Calcutta began like that. But he actually became a great admirer of the final film, Ivan the Terrible, especially because he was a classical music aficionado, especially the Prokofiev score. He used to watch the film again and again and listen to the score, and it's kind of, he was also adept at doing the staff notation. He would even do his own sort of musical compositions in staff notation. And also the name Burfi is a kind of name of a sweetmeat in Bengal. It kind of looks like that. So if you remember the glasses that the magician wears are in the Burfi shape. The other thing I think one should mention is, all kinds of elements have gone into it, is the fact that this actor was an amazing character, a person, artist, writer, singer, composer called Harindranath Chattopadhyay, who again was actually closely associated with the Indian People's Theatre Association. Harindranath Chattopadhyay had been playing this kind of slightly strange, weird figures in popular films also, Bombay films also. I think he also designed the character keeping the actor in mind. And the other last thing that one could mention was, remember when that silhouette where he goes over the fort, the last scene, and he then suddenly evaporates. If you remember the image, it kind of reminds you of Seventh Seal, Bergman's. And I think there is a clear kind of, he must have had that in his mind. Seventh Seal is 57.
Right.
This is 67. So, and by that time, Seventh Seal was a classic.
Right. Right. Yeah. Another thing I want to mention here is, of course, his obsession with getting this brainwashing machine correct. The way he drew it. He drew it again and again, and there are drafts of the way that machine should look. He was actually very careful about the way all the cogs and things will be there. I personally think there is also a lot of Dadaist influence and all that, but you can also get back to Abanindranath and his depiction of Kobandho, in one of his works called Khuddur Jatra, which is a very kind of a postmodern work. So he was very, very careful in the way the machine should look. And if you look at the set design as well, there is this eye, which sort of speaks of surveillance, in the inner chamber of the king, not the court, but the inner chamber. So you have that eye. And that was also designed with something in mind. So I think the machine design, somehow complements, the scientist and the way, the way they operate,
Okay. I have to ask this question. These are musicals. He composed the music as well, and I feel very inadequate every time I talk about music, and Dave Novak is gone. So maybe you guys can a little bit, but what I wanted to ask was, it's a musical, but how does it compare with, I don't mean good or better or worse, not that, but in form, structure, tone, quality, all that. How does it compare with, say, the Bombay films, which are often called musicals, but which really aren't musicals in the sense we think of musicals in Hollywood, or to the Bengali commercial films of the period of the 50s, 60s, or to say something like Umbrellas of Cherbourg by Jacques Demy, the European kind of musicals coming in then.
I'd just like to say something to begin with. Please don't take this comparison seriously. But the one thing that is common between Bombay kind of musical, quote unquote, and Goopy Gyne Bagha Byne and Hirak Rajar Deshe is that Ray composed the songs first and then made the films. I don't know where you could take this.
So that's
the Bombay people do this all the time. They first kind of compose the films and then they think of the script around that.
So perhaps we should also mention the Marathi Sangeet Natak, which is in a way that stands at the origin of Bombay film, and that too is a kind of operatic form where there is a great deal of singing and some dancing, and sometimes rhymed exchanges between the characters. But I'm not sure how familiar Ray was with Marathi Sangeet Natak, but it's a very important form actually.
there is a wonderful interview of Ray in the Life magazine. So Life actually interviewed Ray, and then of course before he was just trying to do Goopy Gyne Bagha Byne, and they sensed that it was a shift that Ray is making from his earlier films to this one. And then there was this talk of Alien as well, so they wanted to sort of talk about it. And Ray actually has a wonderful word to say. He said that, I set out by making my kind of musicals. It's something, I cannot imitate the Bollywood stuff. I cannot make things like, say, Hollywood musicals, which he admired as well. But for him, this is the closest kind that he can make. And he actually wanted to sort of combine everything together to make it just an enjoyable experience. We have to also remember that, and this is a real story, and his son testifies to it. His son actually came one day and said that you make films. His son Sandeep Ray actually came to Satyajit Ray and said, you make films that are not understandable to me, at least as a child. So why don't you make a film for us, for the children? So that gave him a kind of a thought, and that is mentioned in the interview. I started with that very simple premise of making things which are enjoyable to a Bengali child. And then suddenly, he added layer upon layer to make it so deep that we can actually take that leap in order to explain things, which is definitely there. But at the heart of it, and that is where you come back to the child question, at the heart of the film is also to explore the child in you, right? And that's like a very important impulse for Ray as a beginning, as a trigger.
Yeah. Supriya, very short.
Yes,
We are out
I
of
just
time.
had a quick point to make about the two boys in this film, or maybe the same boy who is using a catapult first to knock off this the nose, but then earlier he's hitting the headdress of one of the ministers, right? Now, so you have these two children, or maybe one boy, one child with the catapult, who is making a gesture against power, against kingly power and oppression and tyranny. And you have the same idea used in Shatranj Ke Khiladi, the chess players, where right at the end of the film, you have a boy throwing a stone. All he does is throw a stone towards the British regiment that is marching into Awadh, into Lucknow, in order to dispossess the king, the Nawab, and take it over. And that act of resistance, for which he uses the figure of a young boy, a child, I think that too is something that echoes in his films.
I was also thinking about how much I liked the first film, and I love the second film too, but not in the same way, because the first one has a joyous lightness that the second becomes much more pedantic, And there are many ways to think about what is it that made him change the tone. Perhaps the emergency years, perhaps 68, 9, and after that things became very political in cinema for a while. We all know this, right? Around that time, even film theory became very political for a while, and maybe that pressure was there too. But we can think about that more. But I want to say thank you so much for staying this late, and thanks to our panelists for an incredibly rich